At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, an HOA Karen made a $2.3 million mistake that would land her in federal prison for 8 years. And it all started with a pair of bolt cutters in the wrong military vehicle. Clang! The sound of those bolt cutters biting through my security chain echoed through perfect suburban silence like gunshots. That metallic snap was the moment Bethany Kensington Wright went from HOA president to federal felon in 30 seconds. See, while I was deployed overseas fighting drug cartels, this power-hungry suburban dictator decided my eyesore vehicle needed to disappear. What she didn't know, that Jeep belonged to a federal drug task force, was loaded with $347,000 worth of classified surveillance equipment, and I'm the kind of federal agent who specializes in taking down criminal organizations. She thought she was stealing some soldier's truck. She actually committed federal crimes that would make cartel bosses jealous. What would you do if some HOA tyrant messed with your property while you're serving overseas? Drop a flag emoji and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how many patriots are out there. My name's Marcus Tank Rodriguez, and 3 months ago I thought inheriting my grandmother's house would be a blessing. Boy, was I wrong. Willowbrook Estates. Picture-perfect suburban hell where every house is the same shade of beige, sprinkler systems hiss on automated schedules, and the smell of fresh mulch can't mask the stench of entitlement. HOA dues, $150 a month for community standards. Translation, paying some power-hungry Karen to make your life miserable. I'm Army Reserve MP, recently accepted into a federal drug task force. Grandma Rose's house was supposed to be my safety net. Rent it out during deployment, build equity, honor the woman who raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 12. That house still smells like her homemade tortillas and Bengay. Every creaky floorboard holds memories of her teaching me right from wrong. Mijo, she'd say, you stand up to bullies, but you do it the right way. Enter Bethany Kensington Wright. Picture a 52-year-old real estate agent who drives a white Lexus SUV and measures grass height with an actual ruler. 7 years as HOA president has turned her into a suburban dictator. Her husband Carl sits on city council, making her feel untouchable. This woman sends violation notices for Christmas lights in January. 2 weeks into my deployment, the email hits my inbox. Violation notice, unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. My government-issued Jeep Wrangler, clearly marked with federal law enforcement decals, was apparently an eyesore. Bethany's interpretation of HOA covenants? Work vehicles prohibited in residential driveways. Here's what she didn't know. That Jeep contains $200,000 worth of surveillance equipment for active cartel investigations. GPS trackers, encrypted radios, covert cameras, federal property that requires department authorization to relocate. The fine? $50 per day, accumulating while I'm dodging bullets overseas. My sister Maya, sweet middle school teacher Maya, tried reasoning with this suburban tyrant. She drove over to explain I was deployed, showed copies of my orders, even offered to cover the Jeep with a tarp. Rules are rules, Bethany snapped, looking down at Maya like she was a bug. If your brother cannot follow simple community standards, maybe this neighborhood isn't right for your family. That phone call from Maya still echoes in my head, the sound of her voice cracking as she sat in Grandma's kitchen. Tank, she threatened to put a lien on the house. She said Carl knows people at the school district that supporting you could affect my job. Maya discovered the pattern. The Johnsons, he's a Marine, got cited for his motorcycle being excessively loud. Sarah Martinez, Navy wife with a deployed husband, was fined for garden gnomes being unprofessional. Every military family in Willowbrook was getting targeted. But here's the kicker. Bethany's violations were made up. I had Maya check the actual HOA bylaws, buried in my grandmother's papers, signed when she bought the house in 1987. Government vehicles were specifically exempted. Emergency services, military, law enforcement, all protected. Bethany was literally fabricating rules, counting on residents being too intimidated or ignorant to check. The community lived in fear. Neighbors whispered over fences but wouldn't speak publicly. Bethany had created a climate where questioning her authority meant becoming her next target. Carl's political connections made opposition seem futile. That's when I realized what I was really dealing with. This wasn't about parking or property values. This was organized harassment of military families by a corrupt HOA board with political protection. The texture of sand between my teeth during that phone call with Maya. The smell of diesel and fear sweat mixing in 120-degree heat. The sound of my grandmother's voice in my memory. Stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. While I was serving overseas keeping drugs off American streets, some suburban princess thought she could steal my family's legacy through fabricated fines and intimidation tactics. Bethany Kensington Wright had just declared war on the wrong federal agent. She thought she was facing some helpless military family. What she didn't realize was that I specialize in dismantling criminal organizations, and her little HOA racket was about to become my next takedown. Bethany's next move came 48 hours later, and it was pure suburban warfare. A registered letter hit Maya's mailbox demanding immediate vehicle removal or emergency towing within 24 hours. Not 48 hours. 24. This woman was trying to steal federal property while I was deployed overseas. The letter, carbon copied to Carl's city council office and the local police, cited immediate health and safety violations and emergency neighborhood degradation. Complete fiction, but wrapped in official letterhead with legal-sounding language designed to intimidate. Maya called me from Grandma's kitchen, and I could hear the panic in her voice mixing with the familiar creak of those old floorboards. "Tank, there's a tow truck circling the block. The driver keeps looking at your Jeep like he's sizing it up." The smell of Grandma's vanilla candles couldn't mask the scent of fear in Maya's voice. This was psychological warfare, suburban style. That's when I unleashed my first counterpunch. I contacted JAG, Judge Advocate General, military lawyers who specialize in eating constitutional violations for breakfast. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams took one look at my case file and her expression went from professional interest to righteous fury. "Rodriguez, this woman just threatened to steal federal law enforcement property. That's not an HOA violation. That's a federal felony." Here's something most people don't know. The Service Members Civil Relief Act doesn't just protect military personnel from contract disputes. It specifically prohibits harassment of deployed service members' property. But more importantly, my Jeep isn't just my vehicle. It's federal law enforcement equipment owned by the United States government. Williams immediately filed a formal complaint with Base Command, triggering something beautiful, a federal military liaison review. Suddenly, Bethany's little power trip was on the radar of people with actual authority. But here's where I discovered the real mini twist. And it made everything personal. Maya started digging through Grandma's old HOA documents, and buried in a stack of meeting minutes from 2019, she found a smoking gun. A letter from Bethany to the City Planning Commission, recommending against military housing assistance programs in Willowbrook because transient military populations don't maintain long-term community investment standards. Translation: she'd been trying to keep military families out of our neighborhood for years. The texture of aged paper crumbling between Maya's fingers as she photographed evidence. The sound of her sharp intake of breath when she realized the scope of Bethany's discrimination. Tank. She's been systematically targeting every military family that moves here. The Hendersons got violations for their son's bike being improperly stored. The Washingtons were cited for excessive noise when their baby cried at night. This wasn't random HOA tyranny. This was organized discrimination with political backing. See, Carl had a development deal pending. Luxury condos requiring HOA approval for zoning variances, military families with their unsightly work vehicles and unpredictable deployment schedules hurt the exclusive community marketing angle. Maya's teacher instincts kicked into overdrive. She started reaching out to other targeted families, building a network of documentation. Every fabricated violation, every threatening letter, every intimidation tactic, she was accidentally building a federal discrimination case. But Bethany escalated again, and this time she crossed a line that would haunt her. The sound of expensive heels clicking on concrete echoed through Maya's phone as Bethany conducted her own property inspection of Grandma's house. She was documenting every detail, photographing my Jeep from multiple angles, measuring distances with a tape measure. "Your brother's military service doesn't excuse community non-compliance," she told Maya with that condescending tone that makes you want to introduce entitlement to reality. "Perhaps your family should consider whether this neighborhood is appropriate for your lifestyle." Code words for, "we don't want your kind here." My counterpunch was swift and devastating. I remotely activated the GPS tracking and security systems in my Jeep, standard equipment for task force operations. The data was beautiful. Bethany had been trespassing on my property 17 times in 3 days, photographing federal law enforcement equipment without authorization. That's not just harassment, that's potential espionage. When my task force supervisor, Captain Sarah Chen, heard that some suburban HOA dictator was surveilling federal drug enforcement equipment and threatening military families, her response was beautifully direct. "Rodriguez, how fast do you want me to make this woman's life complicated?" the federal government was about to introduce Bethany Kensington Wright to consequences she never saw coming. Bethany's next move was pure desperation wrapped in suburban authority, and it nearly destroyed my family. 3 days after my JAG complaint, she hired Exec Safe Security to patrol community standards compliance. 2 guards in a white SUV with security plastered on the sides, documenting my Jeep every hour like it was a terrorist threat. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what they were telling the neighbors. Maya called me in tears, her voice cracking over satellite connection from some godforsaken desert outpost. "Tank, they're saying you're dangerous, that military vehicles in residential areas create security risks. Mrs. Patterson won't even make eye contact with me anymore." The sound of Maya's sobs mixing with desert wind through my phone made something cold and hard settle in my chest. These bastards were destroying my family's reputation while I couldn't defend them. My counterpunch had to be surgical, but I was 8,000 miles away with limited communication windows. I contacted Captain Chen during my next authorized call window, explaining how private security was surveilling federal task force equipment. Her response wasn't what I expected. "Rodriguez, this is tricky. If we come in too heavy, we validate their claims that your vehicle is dangerous. We need them to hang themselves." The mini twist came when I remotely accessed my Jeep's security system. Federal task force vehicles have more surveillance tech than most police stations. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, GPS tracking, and automatic photography of anyone within 15 feet. The footage revealed something that made my blood run cold. Bethany wasn't just documenting violations. At 1:43 a.m., security footage showed her using a flashlight to examine my Jeep's interior through the windows, photographing dashboard equipment, even attempting to open the doors. She was trying to access classified federal surveillance equipment. But here's what really scared me. She wasn't working alone. The footage showed her pointing out specific features to the security guards who were taking detailed photographs of federal communications equipment. The community dynamics were crumbling, and Maya was paying the price. Parents at her school started questioning whether a military family with security issues should be teaching their children. Her principal called her in for a conversation about community concerns. The smell of chalk dust and fear filled Maya's voice during our next call. "Tank, they're destroying my career." Bethany told the PTA that military families bring instability and security risks to neighborhoods. "She's using my job against me." That's when I realized this wasn't just about my property anymore. They were systematically destroying my family's life, and I was helpless to stop it from overseas. The texture of helplessness tastes like sand and rage, sitting in a communication bunker, surrounded by the machinery of war, while some suburban terrorists dismantled my sister's life back home. Bethany's security guards escalated by approaching Maya directly. The lead guard, some failed cop with a power complex, cornered her while she was getting groceries. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your brother's military activities," he said, blocking her path to her car. "That vehicle contains equipment that could pose risks to community safety. We need to know what kind of operations he might be running from that house." Maya, bless her teacher instincts, started recording on her phone. "Are you suggesting my brother, who's serving overseas protecting our country, is some kind of threat to American families?" she asked, voice steady despite the tremor I could hear. The guard stepped closer, invasion of personal space designed to intimidate. "Military personnel sometimes bring home problems. PTSD, weapons, surveillance equipment. We're just ensuring community safety." They were painting me as a dangerous, potentially unstable veteran. Classic military discrimination wrapped in community safety language. But Maya's recording captured something beautiful. The guard admitting they were investigating surveillance equipment in my vehicle. That statement just became evidence in a federal espionage case. My counterpunch came through channels Bethany never saw coming. Captain Chen contacted Exec Safe Security's Federal Licensing Bureau, informing them their guards were conducting unauthorized surveillance of classified government equipment. The guards vanished overnight, but their security company now faced federal investigation for espionage activities. Bethany's response to losing her muscle was pure panic. She filed emergency complaints with every agency she could think of: police, fire department, code enforcement, even animal control. But she'd just created a paper trail documenting her obsession with federal property. The war was escalating, and I was still stuck overseas while my family took casualties. But Bethany had no idea she'd just triggered protocols that would bring the full weight of federal law enforcement down on her suburban kingdom. Bethany's desperation reached critical mass at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. and Maya's security camera caught every federal crime in high definition. The sound I'll never forget. Clang, clang, clang. Bolt cutters biting through my security chain, each metallic snap echoing through suburban morning silence like gunshots. Maya's phone buzzing me awake in a deployment tent 8,000 miles away, her voice pure panic. "Tank, she's cutting your locks. She's got bolt cutters and a tow truck, and she's stealing your Jeep right now." Through Maya's phone camera, I watched Bethany Kensington Wright commit multiple federal felonies in real time. Hair disheveled, still in her bathrobe, she'd hired Discount Dave's towing with cash. No paperwork, no questions. And was frantically directing them to load federal law enforcement property onto their flatbed. The tow truck driver took one look at the federal task force decals and started backing away like the vehicle was radioactive. "Lady, this is government property with federal markings. I ain't touching this for any amount of money." "It's abandoned property," Bethany screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria, spittle flying in the morning air. "I'm HOA president with legal authority to remove community violations." That statement, captured on 3 different security cameras, just became Exhibit A in a federal theft case. My counterpunch was swift and devastating. I immediately contacted Captain Chen through emergency channels, triggering protocols for theft of federal law enforcement equipment. Within minutes, federal marshals were dispatched with lights and sirens to my grandmother's address. But here's the beautiful mini-twist. My Jeep's hidden GPS tracker and remote security systems were documenting everything automatically. Federal task force vehicles have kill switches, tracking devices, and cameras that activate when unauthorized movement is detected. The moment Bethany cut my lock, she triggered a federal alert system that pinged Homeland Security databases across 3 states. Maya kept recording when Bethany made her fatal mistake. After the tow truck driver fled, leaving tire marks on the asphalt in his haste to escape, she changed the locks on the community gate, effectively imprisoning my federal vehicle and blocking law enforcement access. "If he wants his precious military truck back, he can follow proper HOA procedures," she shrieked at Maya, waving the new keys like some demented suburban warlord. "Military service doesn't make him above community standards." The texture of helpless rage coursed through my veins as I watched this entitled suburbanite steal federal property while my sister stood recording her meltdown. The smell of diesel fuel and fear sweat seemed to transmit through the phone connection. Knowledge nugget. Federal task force vehicles contain automatic tracking and alert systems that activate during unauthorized tampering. Cutting locks or attempting to move these vehicles triggers Homeland Security protocols, GPS tracking, and federal response teams. This isn't local crime. It's theft of classified government equipment with terrorism enhancement potential. Takeaway. Stealing federal law enforcement vehicles triggers automatic national security alerts and federal task force response. It's not theft, it's potential terrorism. The community uprising began when Mrs. Patterson witnessed Bethany's public breakdown from her front window. This sweet elderly woman who'd survived the Great Depression and buried 2 military sons wasn't about to watch some HOA Karen terrorize a deployed soldier's family. She called every neighbor, every veteran in Willowbrook, every decent person who'd been silently suffering under Bethany's reign of suburban terror. By 10 a.m., my grandmother's house was surrounded by protective neighbors forming a human shield around federal property. "This stops right here, right now," declared Tom Henderson, 72-year-old Vietnam vet whose own son had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. "You want that boy's vehicle, you go through 30 American veterans first." Maya's voice was stronger when she called me back, supported by a wall of community solidarity that made my throat tight with gratitude. "Tank, you should see this. The whole neighborhood is here. Mr. Henderson brought his American flag. Mrs. Chen is making coffee for everyone. They're not leaving." But Bethany's response to community resistance was pure suburban fascism cranked to 11. She filed emergency complaints with every government agency in the phone book. Police, claiming veterans were forming armed militias. Fire department, alleging explosive hazards from military equipment. Code enforcement, fabricating violations about unauthorized assemblies. Even animal control, claiming emotional support dogs were attack animals. Each false report was another federal crime. Filing false statements about military personnel and federal property carries serious penalties under multiple statutes. The breaking point came when federal marshals arrived at Willowbrook Estates and discovered Bethany had changed the community gate locks, preventing federal agents from accessing their own stolen property. That's obstruction of federal justice. Marshal Jennifer Torres, a no-nonsense federal agent who'd arrested cartel bosses and domestic terrorists, took one look at the locked gate, and her expression shifted from professional courtesy to predatory focus. "Ma'am, you've obstructed federal agents investigating theft of government property. Open this gate immediately or face additional federal charges." Bethany's response sealed her fate forever. "I don't recognize federal authority over private HOA property. You people have no jurisdiction in my community." She'd just declared war on the United States government while standing in her bathrobe. Game over. I landed stateside 72 hours later, still tasting desert sand and adrenaline, to find Maya sitting in Grandma's kitchen surrounded by enough evidence to topple a small government. But it was the smell that hit me first. Not Grandma's vanilla candles or fresh tortillas. It was the scent of desperation and fear that had soaked into these walls while I was gone. "Tank, you need to see this before the feds get here," Maya said, her hands trembling as she spread documents across Grandma's dining table. "I found something that changes everything." The manila folders contained 5 years of HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and correspondence that Maya had somehow acquired through what she called her teacher network. But buried in the stack was a document that made my blood run cold. A contract between Kensington Urban Holdings and Eastbrook Development Corporation, dated 6 months before I inherited Grandma's house. The subject line read, "Willowbrook Estates Acquisition Strategy, Phase 2 Implementation." "Tank, they weren't just harassing military families randomly," Maya whispered, her teacher instincts having transformed her into an accidental detective. "They were systematically clearing properties for a massive development deal." The texture of aged paper crumbled between my fingers as I read the details. Carl's company had pre-sold 47 properties in Willowbrook to a national development corporation for luxury condos, properties they didn't even own yet, including Grandma's house. "Look at the target list," Maya said, pointing to an appendix that made me want to punch something. Every military family, every elderly resident, every person who couldn't fight back against bureaucratic harassment, all marked for acquisition facilitation. The Hendersons, the Martinez family, Grandma Rosa, all targets in a coordinated campaign to force sales at below-market prices. But here's the revelation that changed everything. Bethany had been forging HOA violations. Maya showed me the original 1987 HOA bylaws, the real ones, not Bethany's fabricated versions. Military vehicles weren't just allowed, they were specifically protected under federal compliance requirements. "Tank, she created fake rules and counted on people being too scared or ignorant to check," Maya said, her voice gaining strength. "But there's more." The HOA financial records revealed systematic embezzlement. Over 3 years, $184,000 in community funds had been diverted to Carl's development company through fabricated consulting contracts and community improvement projects that never existed. Knowledge nugget: when HOA boards divert community funds to personal businesses without resident approval, it becomes federal mail fraud if any communications crossed state lines. The Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations (RICO) Act applies when these crimes form a pattern of criminal enterprise affecting interstate commerce. Takeaway: HOA financial fraud involving multiple properties and systematic targeting triggers federal RICO prosecution. That's organized crime territory with 20-year sentences. The smell of Maya's fear sweat mixed with determination filled the kitchen as she revealed the final piece. "Tank, I think they killed her." She showed me violation notices sent to Grandma during her final hospice weeks. Citations for property maintenance failures and threats of legal action against a dying woman who couldn't even get out of bed. The stress of fighting these fake violations. Her blood pressure spiked every time one arrived. The hospice nurse said she kept asking if we'd lose the house. The sound of my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Mijo, don't let them take our home." I'd thought she was delirious from medication. She was warning me. Maya's transformation was complete. No longer the scared teacher being bullied by suburban tyrants. She'd become a warrior armed with evidence and righteous fury. "Tank, this isn't about your Jeep anymore. This is about organized crime disguised as community governance. They've been destroying families for profit." The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had exploded. Federal prosecutors were about to inherit a RICO case involving fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and elder abuse. But the real revelation? I wasn't fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for my grandmother's memory and every family they'd destroyed. The war had just become personal in ways Bethany never saw coming. The war room materialized in Grandma's living room within 48 hours, and the irony wasn't lost on me. We were planning the destruction of suburban tyranny in the same space where she used to yell at telenovela villains. Maya had transformed into something I'd never seen before. The scared teacher was gone, replaced by a strategic mastermind coordinating between federal agents, veteran networks, and an army of pissed-off neighbors. The smell of serious government business, burnt coffee, stress sweat, and legal documents had replaced Grandma's vanilla candles forever. Captain Chen arrived with 2 federal prosecutors and enough legal firepower to topple a small government. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez spread Maya's evidence across every surface, shaking her head in amazement. "Rodriguez, I've prosecuted cartel money laundering operations with less documentation than this." That's when she explained something that made my task force training click into place. Back in my federal crimes course, they'd taught us about RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. At the time, I thought it was just for mobsters and drug cartels. Turns out, when suburban tyrants engage in systematic fraud and discrimination affecting multiple states, they become federal organized crime. Maya's evidence showed a pattern of criminal enterprise, embezzlement, fraud, civil rights violations, all coordinated between Carl's city council position and Bethany's HOA authority. Interstate commerce was involved through Carl's development deals, which made it federal jurisdiction. The allies gathering in Grandma's living room looked like a resistance movement. Tom Henderson brought his Vietnam vet network, 12 guys who'd survived actual wars and weren't intimidated by suburban corruption. Mrs. Patterson contributed surveillance photos, including shots of Bethany and Carl's midnight meetings in the community center. Maya's teacher union provided something I hadn't expected: media expertise. Educators know how to communicate complex issues to working families, and they'd been waiting for a chance to support military families against discrimination. The sound of Maya's increasingly confident voice coordinating operations filled rooms where Grandma once hummed Mexican lullabies. Watching my little sister command federal agents and community volunteers made something tight in my chest finally relax. The financial warfare strategy was personal for Maya. She'd spent nights going through HOA records, her teacher brain recognizing patterns that reminded her of catching students who cheated on multiple assignments. The systematic embezzlement wasn't just theft. It was a violation of trust that offended her educator instincts. "Tank, remember when Mom used to balance the household budget on this same table?" Maya said, pointing to forensic accountant spreadsheets showing $184,000 in diverted HOA funds. She taught us that stealing from families was the worst kind of crime. Forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh explained how Carl's scheme worked: selling houses to out-of-state developers before forcing current owners to sell. I remembered similar advance fee frauds from my financial crimes training: promise future property, collect money up front, manipulate circumstances to deliver. Maya had discovered email correspondence between Carl and Eastbrook Development discussing displacement timelines for properties they didn't own. The texture of violation was visceral. These people had planned to steal Grandma's house before she even died. The DIY surveillance network combined my military training with neighborhood determination: hidden cameras, coordinated patrols, encrypted communications. Mrs. Patterson's front window became command central. Tom Henderson's garage housed equipment, and Maya's house served as communications hub. The recall election strategy came from Maya's civics teaching experience. She'd always told her students that democracy only works when citizens participate. Now she was proving it. Most people don't realize that HOA boards can be recalled through resident petitions, typically requiring 25 to 33% of homeowners to trigger special elections. Maya's door-to-door campaign revealed the scope of Bethany's tyranny. The Washingtons had documentation of racial harassment. The Johnsons had records of veteran discrimination. The elderly Kowalskis had been cited for excessive medical equipment noise from their oxygen concentrator. Within 72 hours, Maya collected signatures from 67% of Willowbrook residents demanding immediate board removal. The smell of victory was mixing with desert dust still clinging to my uniform. Media strategy leveraged Maya's teacher network connections. Military family harassment stories went viral in veteran communities, generating congressional attention. 3 representatives requested federal briefings on systematic HOA discrimination. The insurance fraud discovery was pure investigative instinct. Maya found claims Bethany filed for property damage caused by my Jeep, damage that never existed. From my task force experience, I knew insurance fraud was federal prosecutors' favorite charge because it's easy to prove and carries serious penalties. Civil rights attorneys joined our coalition after reviewing discrimination patterns. Systematic targeting of military families violated federal fair housing laws. Elder abuse against grandma triggered additional federal protections worth millions in damages. Maya's election as interim HOA president happened by acclamation at an emergency residence meeting. Her first act was freezing all accounts pending federal investigation. Watching her take the gavel in the same community center where Bethany had terrorized families for years, that was justice served cold. The stakes had evolved beyond personal vengeance. This case was becoming a national model for prosecuting HOA corruption, protecting military families, and proving that organized communities could defeat organized crime. But Bethany and Carl had no idea the net was closing around them. Bethany's desperation turned criminal at 3:17 a.m. when Maya's infrared cameras caught her in our backyard, frantically burning HOA financial records behind Grandma's tool shed. The acrid smell of burning paper and lighter fluid drifted through Maya's bedroom window, mixing with the scent of fear sweat that seemed to follow Bethany everywhere now. She was hunched over a metal trash can like some suburban witch, feeding documents to flames with shaking hands. "Tank, she's destroying evidence in our yard," Maya whispered into her phone, watching through her bedroom window as Bethany fumbled with matches in the darkness. "She's actually burning financial records while under federal investigation." My silent preparation had been building for weeks. Federal surveillance teams were documenting every desperate move, every crime committed in panic. But watching this entitled suburban princess destroy evidence of her own corruption, that was pure poetry. But Bethany's sabotage escalated beyond property damage into personal warfare that made my task force instincts kick into overdrive. Maya discovered her car vandalized the next morning. All 4 tires slashed, military scum spray-painted across the windshield in dripping red letters. The sound of broken glass crunching under Maya's feet as she circled the damage made something cold and calculating settle in my chest. The texture of helpless rage was familiar from deployment, watching enemies attack people you can't protect. But this wasn't some foreign battlefield. This was suburban terrorism against my family. My countermove was professionally satisfying. I called Captain Chen, who made one phone call that changed everything. Federal protective detail was assigned to Maya and other witness families. Not obvious security, but agents who could blend into morning jogs and coffee shop visits. Bethany's surveillance was now being surveilled by people with security clearances and arrest powers. The community response was beautiful. Tom Henderson organized veteran patrols that made Bethany's midnight visits impossible. The sound of combat boots on pavement at 2 a.m. became the new neighborhood soundtrack. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen became command central, coordinating protection schedules over homemade cookies and righteous fury. But Carl's desperation revealed corruption deeper than we'd imagined. Maya discovered city council recordings where Carl had pressured the police chief to ignore military family complaints. His arrogant voice echoing through Maya's laptop made my federal training memories click into place. Back at the academy, they'd taught us about conspiracy charges. When public officials use their positions to systematically violate citizens' rights, it becomes federal civil rights conspiracy. Carl wasn't just enabling Bethany, he was using government power to facilitate discrimination. "These military people bring instability," Carl's recorded voice dripped with entitlement. "Their vehicles, their schedules, their problems affect property values and community character." That recording just became Exhibit A in a federal conspiracy case. Bethany's bribery attempt was captured on federal wire surveillance. She approached Maya outside the grocery store, envelope bulging with cash, her designer perfume unable to mask the stench of desperation. "This is $50,000 for your family," Bethany said, hands trembling as she pushed the envelope toward Maya. "Military families deserve better neighborhoods anyway. Take this money, find somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle." Maya, bless her teacher instincts, kept recording on her phone while federal agents monitored from unmarked vehicles. From my federal crimes training, I knew attempted witness bribery carries 5-year mandatory minimums. But Bethany wasn't done committing federal felonies. She actually tried bribing federal agents. Through some private investigator she'd hired with embezzled HOA funds, Bethany attempted to offer federal agents money to make this military situation disappear. The texture of pure stupidity was almost refreshing. She thought federal agents were as corrupt as her suburban kingdom. Federal agents don't just refuse bribes. They document them, record them, and add them to case files that ensure decades in federal prison. Carl's political allies started fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The mayor publicly distanced himself. City council members demanded Carl's resignation. His development company's stock price collapsed when corruption allegations hit state media. The smell of expensive cologne couldn't mask Carl's panic during emergency city council meetings. He tried using city resources to discredit federal investigations, claiming outside military agitators were targeting successful local businesses. Every abuse of office was being documented by federal agents who specialized in political corruption. Maya started receiving death threats, anonymous notes under her windshield, distorted voicemails warning that accidents happen to teachers who don't mind their own business. The sound of Maya's voice cracking during those threatening calls made something primal and protective roar to life in my chest. But my response was calculated federal precision. Threatening witnesses in federal investigations triggers FBI terrorism task forces. Every anonymous threat was being traced through phone records, handwriting analysis, and digital forensics that would make CSI jealous. Bethany's final desperate move was filing false police reports claiming Maya was mentally unstable and planning violent retaliation against community leaders. She actually told police that military families were forming armed militias in Willowbrook. Filing false reports about federal witnesses during active investigations isn't local crime. It's federal obstruction of justice with terrorism enhancements. The beauty of federal patience was watching Bethany destroy herself one crime at a time while methodical agents built cases ensuring she'd never terrorize another family. Bethany's final desperate gambit was a full-scale media assassination that revealed the true scope of her suburban criminal network. The attack hit Maya's school first. Anonymous complaints flooded the district office claiming she was radicalizing children with anti-government military propaganda and creating unsafe environments for civilian families. The sound of Maya's voice cracking during her panicked phone call made my hands clench into fists. "Tank, they're trying to destroy my career," she whispered from her empty classroom, the familiar smell of chalk dust and children's innocence now tainted with fear. "Parents are demanding I be fired. The principal called me in for emergency discussions about my associations with unstable military elements." That's when I discovered Bethany had hired Morrison and Associates, the same PR firm that whitewashes politicians after corruption scandals. They were painting me as a dangerous veteran with PTSD who brought military-grade threats to peaceful suburban communities. The texture of manufactured lies felt different from enemy propaganda overseas. This was personal warfare designed to destroy families, not just missions. My silent preparation had been months in the making, and Maya's documentation skills had evolved beyond anything I'd seen in federal training. She'd been recording every threat, every lie, every coordinated attack on our family's reputation. But the smear campaign revealed something that made my task force experience kick into overdrive. Bethany wasn't working alone. She'd coordinated with HOA boards in 3 states to develop model policies for managing military family disruptions in suburban communities. This wasn't random harassment. This was systematic discrimination being exported nationwide. From my federal civil rights training, I knew conspiracy cases that cross state lines trigger RICO prosecutions. When organizations coordinate to violate citizens' constitutional rights, it becomes organized crime. Maya's counterpunch was beautifully devastating. Her students and parents organized a support rally that filled the school parking lot with American flags and signs reading, "We support Teacher Maya," and "Military families protect our freedom." The sound of 3rd graders chanting, "Thank you, Mr. Tank's sister," echoed across the playground where Maya had spent years nurturing young minds. These children understood justice better than suburban adults. But Bethany's desperation reached criminal insanity when she hired private investigators to surveil Maya's daily life. They followed her to school, photographed her interactions with students, documented her grocery shopping, even tracked her morning jogs. The sound of telephoto camera lenses clicking outside classroom windows made something primal and protective roar to life in my chest. Maya discovered listening devices planted in her car during one of their safety inspections. 3 separate surveillance gadgets, all traceable to Morrison and Associates through federal purchase records. The beauty of federal law is its clarity about electronic surveillance. During my task force training, they'd hammered home that unauthorized surveillance devices trigger the Wiretap Act, 20-year federal sentences when it involves witness intimidation. But planting devices in vehicles crosses into Homeland Security territory with terrorism enhancements. Captain Chen's response was swift and federally devastating. The FBI's Counterintelligence Division took over Maya's case, treating her surveillance as potential domestic terrorism. Suddenly, Bethany's suburban harassment was being investigated by people who hunt international criminals. The media explosion reached national levels when military advocacy networks discovered Maya's story. Congressional representatives started demanding answers about systematic HOA discrimination against service families. The smell of national attention was like gasoline on Bethany's carefully constructed suburban image. Fox News called Maya. CNN wanted interviews. Military Times ran front-page coverage of suburban warfare against military families. Carl's political career died publicly during a live broadcast city council meeting. Federal agents served search warrants while cameras rolled, removing boxes of evidence as Carl sat frozen in his council chair. The texture of absolute humiliation was visible on his face as reality crashed down. But Morrison and Associates made the fatal mistake that triggered federal hate crime investigations. They published a community safety report claiming military families brought elevated crime rates, domestic violence, and substance abuse to suburban neighborhoods. Fabricated statistics, false veteran crime data, deliberate misinformation designed to incite discrimination against protected classes. Maya was reading the report when I saw her teacher instincts transform into righteous fury. Tank, they just attacked every military family in America with lies designed to make communities reject veterans. Publishing false information to incite discrimination against military families violates federal hate crime statutes. When it's coordinated for profit across multiple states, it becomes racketeering with civil rights conspiracy enhancements. The federal investigation exploded across 17 states as other military families came forward with similar harassment stories. Maya's documentation methods became the model for federal prosecutors building RICO cases against corrupt HOA networks. Maya started receiving support emails from military spouses nationwide, sharing stories of fabricated violations, coordinated harassment, and systematic attempts to drive service families from suburban communities. The sound of Maya's increasingly confident voice coordinating with federal attorneys filled rooms where Grandma once told us stories about standing up to bullies. My little sister had evolved from victim to national advocate for military family rights. They thought they were fighting one teacher and one soldier, Maya said, surrounded by federal case files documenting nationwide discrimination patterns. They were actually declaring war on every American family that serves this country. The public reckoning was about to arrive, and it would be federally spectacular. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen anything like this, packed beyond fire code limits with federal agents lining the walls, news cameras from 6 stations, and military families from across 3 states who'd driven hours to witness suburban justice. The smell of righteous fury mixed with stale coffee and the electric tension of federal law enforcement about to demonstrate why you don't steal government property. Congressional representatives sat in the front row, taking notes for upcoming hearings on military family discrimination. Bethany arrived fashionably late in her white Lexus, pulling up to a gauntlet of protesters holding signs reading "Military Families Matter" and "Prosecute HOA Terrorists." The sound of her designer heels clicking across asphalt was drowned out by veterans chanting, "Thank you for your service," directed at Maya, not her. She entered like a deposed dictator making a final stand, Carl shuffling behind with the broken posture of a man facing federal prison. The texture of pure panic radiated from both of them as they confronted a room full of families they'd systematically terrorized. Maya took the podium first, no longer the frightened teacher being bullied by suburban tyrants. She'd evolved into something powerful, a national advocate whose voice now carried the authority of federal backing and congressional attention. For 5 years, these people used their positions to wage war against military families. Maya began, her words echoing through speakers broadcasting live across social media platforms. They fabricated rules, embezzled funds, and coordinated discrimination campaigns that violated every principle this country stands for. Thunder rolled through the community center as the crowd erupted in applause that shook the windows. Federal prosecutor Rebecca Martinez stepped forward with evidence boxes representing months of investigation into what she called organized suburban crime. Her voice carried the weight of federal authority that makes criminals realize their amateur hour is over. The United States government has compiled overwhelming evidence of criminal conspiracy involving federal property theft, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice, she announced, each charge hitting like a judicial sledgehammer. Tom Henderson spoke for the veteran community, his Vietnam-weathered voice trembling with emotion. My son served 3 tours protecting this country's freedom. These people thought they could spit on that sacrifice for their personal profit. Today, they learn they were wrong. But the mic drop moment belonged to me. I approached the podium feeling Grandma's presence, her voice echoing in my memory. Stand up to bullies, mijo, but do it the right way. This was the right way. Bethany Kensington Wright thought she was cutting locks on some soldier's personal vehicle, I said, my voice cutting through absolute silence. What she actually did was interfere with an active federal drug operation, compromise classified surveillance equipment, and steal property belonging to the United States government. The collective gasp that filled the room sounded like air being sucked from the building. That Jeep contained surveillance equipment worth $347,000 and evidence from ongoing cartel investigations spanning 4 states. When she cut those locks at dawn, she didn't just commit theft. She compromised national security operations that keep drugs off American streets and protect American families. Bethany's face went the color of old concrete as the true scope of her federal stupidity became clear. She'd graduated from suburban bully to someone who'd interfered with national security. But her real crime wasn't stealing my vehicle, I continued, feeling years of rage transforming into something cold and judicial. Her real crime was waging systematic warfare against military families, using government corruption to steal from the community that trusted her, and believing that suburban entitlement trumped federal law. The crowd exploded into standing ovation, shouts of "Lock her up!" mixing with "Justice for our heroes" as federal agents stepped closer to their targets. Federal Marshal Jennifer Torres moved with practiced precision that spoke of years arresting people who thought they were above the law. She approached Bethany's seat with handcuffs and the kind of federal authority that can't be bargained with or bribed. Bethany Kensington Wright, you're under arrest for theft of federal law enforcement property, conspiracy to violate civil rights, embezzlement of community funds, witness intimidation, and obstruction of federal justice. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through speakers as cameras captured the moment suburban tyranny met federal consequences. Bethany's expression shifted from defiance to the dawning realization that her suburban kingdom couldn't protect her from federal prison. Carl tried fleeing through the back exit like the coward he'd always been, but ran straight into federal agents who'd anticipated exactly that move. His arrest was less dramatic but equally satisfying, watching corruption meet accountability in real time. The federal protection of military and law enforcement equipment had become brutally educational. These aren't just vehicles, they're classified government assets protected by laws carrying mandatory minimum sentences. When suburban terrorists interfere with federal operations, they discover that local corruption meets federal consequences with mathematical precision. Maya was interviewed live by national media, her transformation from terrorized teacher to military family advocate inspiring congressional action. This proves that organized harassment of military families is federal crime, she told cameras broadcasting to millions. No HOA board, no matter how corrupt, is above the United States Constitution. The taste of victory was sweeter than every memory of Grandma's kitchen, mixed with the satisfaction of watching bullies discover that federal law doesn't negotiate. 18 months later, I stood in Grandma's kitchen reading the final sentencing report, and I could almost hear her voice saying, "Justice served the right way, mijo." Bethany received 8 years in federal prison with no parole, plus $647,000 in restitution to affected families. The federal judge's words became legendary in legal circles. Your systematic harassment of military families represents domestic terrorism disguised as community governance. This court will not tolerate suburban tyranny. Carl got 6 years and lifetime prohibition from public office. His development empire collapsed completely, with $3.2 million in community settlements ensuring that every family they'd harassed received compensation for years of suffering. But the real victory was watching our neighborhood transform from a place of fear into a community that protects its own. Maya revolutionized HOA governance as the democratically elected president, implementing bylaws that became the national model for military family protection. The smell of fresh hope replaced the stale air of corruption as she unveiled the Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights, federal protections written into community law. The Veteran Memorial Park sits where Bethany's house once stood, seized through federal asset forfeiture and transformed by community vote. Children now play on swings where suburban tyranny once lived, their laughter echoing across grass that grows freely without ruler measurements. The Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights became Maya's calling. She left teaching to help families nationwide fight HOA discrimination, using our case as the blueprint for federal civil rights prosecution. Her documentation methods are now taught at FBI training academies. Grandma's house evolved into mission control for military family advocacy. The kitchen where she taught us about standing up to bullies now hosts strategy sessions with congressional staffers, constitutional lawyers, and families fighting their own suburban wars. The practical impact exceeded every hope. Congressional legislation now requires HOA financial transparency and protects military families from systematic harassment. The Tank Rodriguez Act provides federal oversight of community governance, with criminal penalties for discrimination against service members. Knowledge that most people never learn became our gift to American families. Military personnel have constitutional protections that override local ordinances. HOA boards can be recalled through resident petitions requiring only 25% of homeowners. Federal law treats systematic discrimination as organized crime punishable by decades in prison. Takeaway: military families have federal rights that no HOA can override, and communities have power to remove corrupt boards when they organize together. The National HOA Corruption Database documented over 400 similar cases since our story went viral, triggering federal investigations that protected thousands of military families from suburban terrorism. Property values in Willowbrook increased 31% after corruption elimination, proving that justice is profitable and ethical governance attracts quality residents. Military families now specifically seek our community, knowing they'll be protected and celebrated. Maya's transformation into a national advocate brought unexpected joy. She married Captain Sarah Chen's brother David, a Navy veteran who moved to Willowbrook because our story proved military families could win against corruption. Their wedding reception filled the community center where we'd watched federal justice delivered live. I found my own happiness with Elena Martinez, the federal prosecutor who'd helped build our case. She transferred to local operations, and we bought the house next to Grandma's. Waking up every morning in the neighborhood we fought to protect feels like victory served daily. The Rodriguez Military Scholarship Fund, created from lawsuit settlements, has sent 23 military children to college. Each graduation ceremony reminds us that one family's courage can transform entire communities and create opportunities for the next generation. Mrs. Patterson, now 91 and still the neighborhood's conscience, cuts the ribbon at every community event. "Your grandmother knew you'd do something special," she tells me during park dedications, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "She just didn't know you'd save the whole neighborhood." At the moment that made everything worthwhile came during our first annual Freedom Day celebration. Hundreds of military families gathered in the park where Bethany's tyranny once lived, sharing stories of victory over suburban corruption. The sound of children's laughter mixing with veterans' pride, the smell of barbecue and freedom filling air once poisoned by fear. The texture of Maya's hand in mine as we watched families gather safely in the community Grandma loved. But my favorite moment happens every morning when I see Old Glory flying over houses where military families live without fear of harassment. This is what victory tastes like: justice served, community healed, and the knowledge that bullies can be defeated when good people organize and fight back. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments. The Rodriguez Foundation provides free legal assistance to military families fighting suburban discrimination. Subscribe for more stories about defeating corruption through community courage, and hit that notification bell if you believe every veteran deserves a safe home.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.